November 28, 1944, 6:15 hours, outside the village of Huichen, western Germany. Fog lay thick over the frozen pines. The American GIs of Baker Company could barely see 10 feet ahead, their boots crunching over frost-bitten leaves and frozen mud. They moved slowly, weapons tight against their chests, breath ghosting in front of their faces. The woods were a graveyard. Artillery had stripped the trees bare. Jagged trunks pointed skyward like bayonets, and the ground was crisscrossed with shell holes and the skeletal remains of foxholes long abandoned. Somewhere ahead, nestled between the broken pines and ruins of a shattered brick farmhouse, a German MG-42 nest waited with its barrel already trained on the trail. The machine gunner's name was Dieter Kruger, and he was laughing. "Look at them," he said, squinting through the optics. "They don't even know we're here. Stupid Americans. Same mistake every time. Walk upright. Loud boots. Think their helmets make them invincible." His loader chuckled. "You're going to make another belt necklace today, ya?" Dieter flexed his gloved fingers and pressed them to the trigger assembly. The MG-42 was clean, oiled, cold to the touch. Beside him, 10 belts of 7.92 ammunition lay coiled like serpents in the snow, their brass casings gleaming faintly in the morning gray. In the trees below, the first squad of GIs emerged from the fog, 4 men in a staggered line, each cradling an M1 Garand, unaware of what watched them from above. Dieter smiled. The MG-42 opened with a sound that did not belong to the human world. It was not a machine gun so much as a chainsaw of bullets, a ripping, shattering blur of noise. Within the first 2 seconds, it had fired 50 rounds. The lead GI folded immediately, 2 bullets hitting his chest and punching through the pack on his back. The others dove sideways, but one was caught mid-roll and spun violently into the underbrush. The snow turned red. "Baker contact High Ridge," came the shout from the rear. "MG down, get down." The remaining Americans scrambled behind a collapsed tree, the thick trunk shredded in seconds as the MG's fire adjusted. Woodchips flew. A helmet spun into the air, its owner's blood misting the air behind it. From a ridge 200 yards back, Sergeant Charles Charlie Novick watched through binoculars, stomach tight. "Same spot as yesterday," he muttered. "Farmhouse Ridge. Those bastards never moved." The platoon commander ducked next to him, panting. "We've already lost 6 men on that ridge. That MG has us pinned. Can't flank left. Minefield. Can't flank right. Draw S too steep." Novick lowered the binoculars. "Then we take the nest head-on." The lieutenant stared at him. "With rifles?" "With a bazooka." They both turned. Private First Class Marco Herrera stood beside them, soaking wet, face pale but determined. Slung across his shoulder was the 60 M1A1 Bazooka, a shoulder-fired anti-tank rocket launcher. Primitive, loud, limited range, 2-man job. "I need a loader," he said. "You won't make it halfway," the lieutenant said. "Give me cover," Herrera said. "I only need 1 shot." Downrange, Dieter adjusted his sights again. Another pair of GIs had tried to cross a ditch. One made it halfway. The other was hit in the thigh and lay screaming until the MG crew silenced him with a 3-round burst. The German squad was confident. They'd held this line for 3 days. Every time the Americans probed the woods, they came up against the same result: steel rain, American blood, and laughter in the nest. At 6:38 hours that changed. Through the fog came 2 silhouettes darting low fast. One held something long on his shoulder. Dieter blinked. Was zum Teufel. The MG-42 barked again, bullets chewing through bark and air. But the Americans kept moving, slipping behind stumps, frozen corpses, roots and trenches, each bound perfectly timed with the bursts. They were covering the gaps, the moments when the gunner reloaded or adjusted. One moment they were 80 yards out, the next 50. The loader beside Dieter fumbled with a new belt. Too close. They're trying something. I see it, Dieter hissed. Got the one with the tube, kill him first. He aimed just as Herrera dropped behind a boulder. The loader cursed. Lost sight. Behind the rock, Herrera was shaking. His loader, Private Greenfield, was white as snow. Load it now. Greenfield unlatched the tube, slid in a 2.36-inch rocket. The warhead clicked into place. A spring snapped forward, arming the charge. Ready, he whispered. They popped up. Dieter shouted, there. The MG-42 swung. Bullets tore the snow around the boulder's edge. One clipped Greenfield's helmet, spinning it from his head. He dropped, blood trickling from his ear. But Herrera was already rising. He sighted the nest, a stone wall half buried in pine, the glint of the gun barrel, 2 men behind it. He fired. The rocket hissed, a plume of white smoke trailing behind it. Dieter saw it too late. Cover. The bazooka round struck the wall just beneath the MG. There was no cinematic explosion, no fireball, just a whump, a slab of stone collapsing, and a blossom of smoke and dust that swallowed the nest whole. When it cleared, the MG-42 was gone. So were Dieter and his loader. Their laughter didn't echo anymore. Silence fell over the woods. For the first time in days, American boots moved forward without being torn apart by 7.92 fire. Herrera dropped the empty tube and crawled forward. Behind him, the rest of Baker Company rose from their holes, rifles up, eyes locked on the shattered ridge. One rocket, one shot. A weapon designed for tanks had just ended the reign of the fastest machine gun in the war. No cheers, just breath, relief, and the sound of wind through broken trees. By 7:10, the ridge was in American hands. The MG-42 crew never fired another round. And the Germans who had laughed learned something that day. When the Americans bring a bazooka to a gunfight, the jokes end fast. The barrel was still warm when Herrera slumped behind the boulder and wiped the sweat from his brow with a shaking hand. He never fired the bazooka in combat before. Training didn't cover what it felt like when the target was looking back at you. Greenfield was alive, dazed, bleeding from the ear, but alive. Around them, the forest seemed to exhale. Birds that had gone silent during the fight fluttered nervously back into the trees. Distant gunfire continued in other sectors, but the immediate ridge, the one that had killed a dozen men in 3 days, had fallen quiet. They waited 5 minutes before moving, not out of fear but out of disbelief. A single shot, one rocket from a 2-man team, had erased a position that 2 full platoons had failed to silence. Sergeant Novick was the first to reach them. He ducked low behind the crater where the MG-42 had once ruled and crouched beside the remains. The impact had torn the nest apart, stone, flesh, and weapon reduced to blackened debris. The MG's receiver was twisted and scorched. One of the belts hung like a vine from the shattered lip of the trench, bullets still curled in its links. "You did it," he muttered. Herrera nodded once. "I didn't do it," he said. "The bazooka did." Novick looked at him for a long moment. Then he stood and turned to the rest of the squad. "Get moving," he barked. "Clear the farmhouse. That nest wasn't alone." They moved forward with rifles high, boots cautious on the frost-covered soil. The Germans had dug in hard around Huichin. Every tree could be wired for detonation. Every stone wall could hide a rifle barrel. But the psychological barrier, the noise, the speed, the impossibility that had been the MG-42 was gone. What remained were just men, and those the Americans knew how to fight. Inside the farmhouse, they found 3 more Germans. One had been wounded by the blast and bled to death against the hearth. The others had fled deeper into the woods, leaving behind ration tins and cigarette butts still warm. Novick radioed back to Battalion HQ. "Ridge is clear. Baker moving east. We need replacements and resupply. We're down to half strength. The voice on the other end crackled back. Copy. Hold your position until Charlie can reinforce. Armor's delayed. Road S blown. Novik swore under his breath. Figures. Outside, Herrera sat against the farmhouse wall, cleaning the launch tube with trembling fingers. His hands smelled like cordite. His mouth tasted like fear. Greenfield sat beside him, a bandage over his ear, watching the tree line. Think they'll send more? He asked. They always do, Herrera said. That night Baker Company dug in along the ridge. They had taken it, but holding it was another matter. Cold crept into their bones. The snow returned, light and dry, dusting their helmets like ash. No one slept. They listened, waited, finger on trigger. And in the silence between falling flakes, some imagined they still heard the MG-42, not as it was, but as a ghost. The sound of it haunted them, an echo in the timber, a memory in the marrow. In the German rear lines, Oberfeldwebel Günther Brandt lit a cigarette with trembling fingers and listened as another report came over the field radio. Ridge position neutralized, Kruger's nest destroyed, American patrols advancing east. Brandt stared at the map in front of him, the red pencil lines bleeding into blue. The ridge had been considered untouchable. Kruger was the most experienced gunner in the battalion. His MG team had halted 2 companies. Now they were gone to a bazooka of all things. A lucky shot, his aide muttered. Brandt exhaled slowly. No, not luck. American initiative. They're adapting faster than we are. The aide scoffed. Still peasants with rifles. Brandt turned. Peasants don't carry rocket launchers into the trees and kill hardened machine gunners. Peasants don't coordinate armor with infantry and drop fire from the sky like thunder. If we keep underestimating them, we'll end up like Kruger. He tapped the map. Pull back the southern flank. Tell the artillery to switch to airburst. And get me 2 more MG teams. We don't hold this line by sunrise. We don't hold anything. The snow was still falling when the next contact came. At 4:12 hours, an American sentry spotted shadows moving through the tree line north of the ridge. He didn't wait. He fired 2 rounds into the dark. The line erupted. German mortars dropped in arcs. Machine guns barked from new dugouts. Rifle squads surged forward in the fog, screaming across no man's land. It was a counterattack, fast and violent, aimed not at retaking the position, but at shattering Baker Company's cohesion. Herrera woke to the sound of his own heartbeat pounding behind his eyes. He grabbed the bazooka tube and scrambled to the edge of the trench, scanning for armor. None yet. Just men. They came fast, grenades in hand, firing from the hip. Novik's voice cut through the madness. Hold the left, hold the left. Guerin's answered back, their rhythm steady but overmatched. For every American shot, a dozen German ones cracked back. Greenfield was already loading. His ear was stuffed with cotton, blood dried in a crust down his neck. Where? He asked. MG nest left slope. Herrera aimed. The round leapt with a thunderclap. It struck short. The nest wasn't fully exposed, but the shockwave collapsed half the position and sent the team scattering. They reloaded. Another, this one aimed higher. The second shot cracked against the frozen earth and ignited the ammo belt inside. The fireball lit the slope like sunrise. Screams followed. No one laughed this time. At dawn, the attack had faltered. The Germans fell back, their wounded carried or left behind. Baker held barely, 5 more dead, 9 wounded, half the company's ammo gone. But the ridge stood. Herrera sat against a broken tree stump, the bazooka resting across his knees like a war trophy. His face was pale, eyes bloodshot, but his hands no longer shook. Keep that thing warm, Novik told him. We're not done yet. Herrera nodded. In the war to come, there would be more MG nests, More laughter, more broken confidence. But after that ridge, one thing was different. Now they knew what could happen when someone stopped running from a machine gun and fired back. And the Germans, for all their confidence in belts and barrels, began to whisper something new among their ranks. Beware the American with the rocket. The ridgeline held through dawn and into the bitter cold afternoon. Medics moved quietly among the foxholes, tagging the dead, wrapping the wounded. Snow turned pink around the bodies. No one spoke unless they had to. The men of Baker Company had survived something ancient and something new, a battle of attrition and a battle of innovation. And now they waited for the next one. Herrera didn't sleep. He just sat, head back against a shattered pine, the empty tube of the bazooka beside him like an old, tired dog. His ears still rang, his vision blurred at the edges, but he could still hear the voices from the night before, the screams, the shouts, the thump of the rocket hitting dirt, the sound of the MG belt igniting like a fuse. He'd seen the fireball reach 10 feet high. He hadn't seen anyone crawl out of it. The lieutenant came down from the farmhouse before noon, his coat buttoned to the chin and his gloves soaked through. He crouched next to Herrera and lit a cigarette with cupped hands. "You look like hell," he said. Herrera nodded. "You'll be moving in 2 hours. Battalion wants the road cleared by nightfall." Herrera blinked. More ridge. "Not this time. They think it's a supply corridor. Might be armor, might not. Just a village on a crossroads with a few houses and a church steeple." "And if it's not just a supply corridor?" The lieutenant exhaled smoke into the freezing air. "Then it's your lucky day. You get to find out first." They pushed out at 1400 hours. Snow crunched underfoot, brittle and dry, a layer of powder over old frozen blood. Baker Company moved in staggered columns, rifles at the ready, no talking. Every man who'd seen the MG nest die now walked a little faster, stood a little straighter. Not because they believed they were invincible, they weren't, but because they knew now that even the worst position could be broken. The bazooka rode on Herrera's shoulder, its empty metal frame bouncing against his back like the spine of some mechanical beast. Greenfield walked beside him, fresh bandage around his ear, a new rocket carried carefully in both hands like it might go off if the wind blew wrong. They reached the edge of the village just before dusk. 3 stone buildings, a well, a barn with half its roof caved in, a narrow road that snaked off toward the east where tank tracks were half frozen into the mud. There were no civilians, no smoke from chimneys, no bark of dogs, just that wide silence, the kind that doesn't belong to peace but to an enemy that's already dug in. The lead scout stopped cold, one fist raised. Movement at the steeple. Novik dropped to one knee, raised his field glasses. There. A slit of metal in the bell tower, not a bell, not a weather vane. A barrel. They hadn't even reached the center of town when the first shot rang out. Not an MG-42 this time, but something sharper, deeper. A sniper. The round tore through the thigh of the point man, spun him to the ground screaming. His leg dangled like meat. "Cover," Novik shouted. "Windows, upper levels, move now." They scattered, ducking behind low stone walls and broken carts, firing blind toward the tower. Herrera hugged a trough, Greenfield beside him. "You see anything?" "No, too many angles." They heard it then, a sound they knew too well. The buzz of tracks. A Panzer III rolled into view behind the barn, its turret already rotating. Painted in winter white, caked with dirt, the tank moved like a ghost across the yard. Men screamed. Someone fired a rifle uselessly at the treads. The coaxial MG opened up, stitching the road with death. "Bazooka," someone shouted. "Get the goddamn bazooka." Herrera was already moving. They ducked into the shell of a house, glass crunching underfoot. The walls had been blown open by artillery days ago. It was the only place in the square with line of sight to the tank. Greenfield dropped beside him, hands trembling as he unwrapped the rocket from its canvas sleeve. "Load it." "No backblast space," Greenfield warned. "Wall's too close." "Then we lose the wall." Herrera braced the tube on the windowsill, aimed through the gap in the frame. His breath came in short gasps. He could see the Panzer's gun swinging, chewing through another squad behind the well. "Ready?" Greenfield hissed. "Fire in the hole." He squeezed the trigger. The room flashed white. The blast knocked plaster from the ceiling. The rocket screamed toward the tank and struck just above the treads. The explosion was muffled. It hadn't penetrated the main armor. Smoke billowed, but the tank kept moving, turret now locking directly onto the house. Herrera's eyes went wide. "Move." They dove out the back just as the round punched through the front of the house and vaporized the corner room. Chunks of masonry rained down around them. They rolled into the alley, ears ringing, lungs burning. "Missed," Greenfield groaned. Herrera yanked the second tube from his back. "Not done." The tank turned, MG firing again, ripping into wood and stone as it tracked movement. It crushed the trough where Herrera had been moments before. The bazooka had only one shot left. They skirted behind the barn. A low wall offered minimal cover, but it was enough. Herrera rose to one knee. The tank was 40 yards away, side profile exposed, turret turned the wrong way. "Now." Greenfield slammed the round into place. It clicked home. No time to steady, no time to breathe. Herrera fired. The rocket streaked across the frozen yard and struck the seam between the turret and the hull. This time the sound was different. Not a thump but a crack followed by a thunderclap. The tank shuddered, belched smoke from its hatch, then erupted in a pillar of fire. The turret popped like a bottle cap. Flames licked out of every seam. For a moment no one moved. Then the Americans surged forward, firing at windows, clearing doorways. The sniper was found slumped against the bell in the steeple, throat cut by a falling shard of glass from the first blast. Herrera sat down hard in the street, snow melting against his back. The bazooka tube was empty, smoking faintly, metal hissing in the cold. Novik knelt beside him. "That's two." Herrera didn't answer. "You're making a habit of this," Novik said. "MG nest one day, tank the next." "I'm not doing it to show off," Herrera muttered. "I know." They sat there a long time, until the fire in the Panzer burned itself down to flickers. When command tallied the battle later, they counted 17 dead Germans, 1 tank, and 4 American casualties. They never found the loader from the Panzer. Some said he jumped out and fled. Others claimed he burned in the turret. Herrera never checked. He only remembered the laughter from the MG nest, the confidence in Kruger's voice, the way the sound of the weapon had ruled the trees until it didn't. Now they had tanks, yes, and artillery and more waiting up the road. But they also had him. And every time the Germans brought something to the field that looked unbreakable, something with steel and range and fire, they learned the same thing. It only takes one. They moved out before dawn the next morning, stepping over the frozen carcass of the Panzer, its steel skin blistered from the inside. The fire had long since died, but the hatch still reeked of burned rubber and flesh. No one said a word as they passed it. Some made the sign of the cross. Others just tightened their grip on their rifles and looked forward. The next objective was Hill 217, a slope overlooking the road to Düren. Intelligence said the Germans had started building a fallback position there, logs, trenches, and a new line of MG positions. The kind of ridge you could only take once. The kind of ridge that, if you failed to clear it the first time, became a meat grinder. Herrera knew what was waiting. The sound always came before the bullets, That dry, mechanical burst that didn't belong in nature. Novik briefed them under a shattered bridge, his breath steaming between words. There's no artillery support. They're shelling the city ahead. It's just us and 3rd Platoon. The Krauts have 2 nests confirmed. Could be more. They're dug in under the slope trench line running east to west. If we get close enough, we can flank the position and collapse the ditch. But we need that bazooka. He looked straight at Herrera. You still good for one more? Herrera didn't speak for a moment. His hand flexed once around the steel frame of the launcher. He looked at Greenfield, then nodded. I'm good. The climb began slow, through snow-covered brush and thickets of bramble that snagged their clothes and tore at gloves. The trees thinned near the crest. The trail narrowed. Sunlight cut through in brittle shafts. Somewhere up ahead, the enemy waited. Somewhere, a machine gun was already zeroed in on their path. They reached the halfway mark when the first burst came. It wasn't the MG-42 this time, it was worse. An MG-34, older but just as fast and quieter. The bursts came in shorter rattles, more deliberate, designed not to suppress but to kill. One man went down instantly. Another was dragged screaming into cover with a shattered ankle. The fire came from 2 directions, overlapping arcs. They were in a crossfire. Get down, Novik shouted. Ambush. The snow erupted around them. Bullets sliced through branches, snapping them like twigs. The GIs dove behind rocks, logs, whatever they could find. Smoke grenades were popped, purple and white plumes expanding between them and the slope. But the guns didn't stop. They simply adjusted fire. Greenfield was pinned with 2 others behind a stump. I can't see anything, he shouted. Herrera was 5 yards to his left, crouched behind a stone outcropping, squinting through the smoke. He could just make out one of the muzzle flashes. A stuttering flame from behind a sandbagged window cut into the slope. The second gun was further left, concealed. He tapped the launcher. It was loaded, ready. He made the call. Greenfield, on my mark, toss frags. I'll take the right nest. You'll get cut in half. Only if I stop running. 3, 2, 1. The smoke grenades were thinning. He had seconds before visibility returned. Greenfield hurled 2 frags into the left side trench. The blasts went off nearly in sync, sending dirt and metal clattering into the air. Screams followed. Herrera broke cover. He ran straight uphill, the launcher slung on his back, chest heaving, boots sliding in the snow. Tracer fire zipped past him, sowing the ground inches from his feet. One round caught his coat, tugged him sideways, but he didn't fall. He hit the embankment hard, slamming against the sandbags just beneath the muzzle. From above, the German gunner shouted something, a panicked, surprised bark. Herrera stood, fired point-blank into the nest. The explosion was deafening. The warhead didn't just penetrate, it shredded the entire window, sending the upper edge of the trench wall collapsing into the gun pit. Smoke billowed upward. Limbs and metal landed meters away. The MG-34 went silent. Herrera dropped to his knees, the launcher clattering beside him. The silence that followed was total. Even the German second nest didn't fire. Either the frags had taken it or they'd run. No one cared which. Novik's voice came through the static of the field radio. We're moving, hills clear. Herrera couldn't answer, his throat burned. His hands were raw, but he nodded, slowly, once. That night they dug in on the hilltop. Engineers came up with barbed wire and sandbags. The rest of Baker set up watch rotations and ate what they could scavenge. It was cold and no one had enough socks. A few shared cigarettes. Others cleaned their weapons in silence. Greenfield sat beside Herrera, chewing on a protein biscuit. 3 nests now, he said, and that tank. Herrera didn't respond. You ever think about what you'll do when this ends? Still nothing. I think about it, Greenfield went on. I think I'll open a garage. My dad had one in Jersey, old Chevys mostly. Maybe I'll do that. Herrera looked at him for a long time, then finally spoke. I'll never work with tubes again. Greenfield grinned, fair. They both looked out over the dark treetops, the snow glowing faint under a waxing moon. The slope below was still, but they knew it wouldn't be for long. The next morning, orders came through. Advance to Düren, Germans pulling back toward the Rower. Intelligence suggested armor and pockets of resistance, likely holdouts desperate, disorganized. But holdouts could still kill. Herrera rechecked the bazooka tube, smoothed the edges with a rag, and closed his eyes for just a moment longer before the march began. What they found outside Düren wasn't a trench. It wasn't a nest. It was a fortified wall of rubble with an anti-tank gun hidden inside a gutted church and a pair of MGs cross-wired through basement windows. The streets had been mined, the buildings pre-sighted. Every corner was another trap. 3 men were lost in the first hour. And somewhere ahead, another MG opened up, this one with laughter behind it, German soldiers jeering through the echoes of fire, confident again. Until Herrera crawled within range. Until the tube rose up over a shattered countertop. Until the rocket screamed again. Herrera fired before the German gunner could swing his barrel fully across the street. The rocket streaked through the shattered archway of what had once been a pharmacy and struck the support beam beneath the machine gun window. The explosion didn't obliterate the gun. It simply took the building's spine with it. The second story collapsed with a low, groaning thunder. Masonry, wood, and glass caved inward in a choking cloud of dust. The MG fell silent. No more jeering, no more laughter. Only the sound of boots rushing forward, American voices barking, moving from cover to cover, clearing rooms with bayonets, grenades, and discipline that had been beaten into them since the hedgerows. Düren was hell. It wasn't like the forest or the ridge or the road. Düren was jagged and urban and soaked with blood from both sides. Its stone streets were carved into kill zones. Its cellars were converted into bunkers. Every room cleared had a price. Every alley taken left behind a body. It wasn't a charge. It was a bleed. But Baker Company kept moving. And every time the Germans built confidence. Every time they braced themselves behind another heavy weapon or jeered at another trapped American patrol, Herrera and Greenfield would crawl forward through debris and frost, raise the tube, and erase the laughter. They took out a bunker entrance on the third day. A reinforced firing point dug beneath a crumbled cathedral, shielded by rubble and sandbags. It had killed 8 men from Charlie Company in less than 10 minutes. The field phone operators screamed over the wire for someone to bring down fire on it, but the artillery was tied up with a counter-battery fight 5 miles north. Novak said the same thing he always said. Get Herrera. They moved through the sewer, filthy, cold, stinking of blood and chemicals. Greenfield nearly slipped and fell into a burst pipe, his hands fumbling to keep the rocket dry. They climbed through a storm drain, broke into a ruinous side room, and positioned the launcher just 20 meters from the bunker's side slit. No warning, no command. Just the hiss of the rocket and the sound of confidence shattering. After the blast, the air filled with screams in German. Some were wounded, some were begging, some were burning. Herrera had stopped hearing the words. He only heard the tone, the kind of scream you made when you realized the weapon you'd mocked now had your number. By the 4th day, the Germans stopped laughing. They still fought, still counterattacked, still laid traps and mines and machine guns behind curtains and piles of broken chairs, but the jeering died, the smug shouting after ambushes, the lazy bursts of suppression fire followed by curses in clipped Saxon German. All of it faded into silence. Because they knew now. They knew that somewhere among the GIs crawling toward them, somewhere behind a wall or beneath a window, was a soldier who didn't hesitate to shoulder a steel tube, fire into the dark, and walk through the fire to do it again. Word spread. They began to call it Rohrangel, the Pipe Angel. The name wasn't out of awe, it was out of dread. The Americans didn't know the name. They only saw the effect. German squads abandoning MG positions early, retreating from urban holds at the first sign of the Bazooka team. Even tanks hesitated, moving erratically, hiding behind their own rubble, waiting too long to fire. On the sixth day, it was over. Düren was in American hands. What remained of its German defenders either lay dead in collapsed cellars or surrendered by the dozens, hands raised, eyes sunken with exhaustion and the kind of fear that only came from expecting death at every window. Herrera never raised the launcher again after that. He didn't have to. He left it in the rubble of the pharmacy where he'd fired his first rocket in the town, laid it down carefully across a window ledge and walked away. He didn't say a word to anyone. No speech. No ceremony. Just left it there, still stained with the smoke of 3 kills and the heat of 6 days of war. Greenfield didn't ask why. He just followed. Novik found him later, sitting in the back of a transport truck with a wool blanket over his shoulders, staring out at the ruins. "Orders came in," Novik said. "We're rotating to rest. Belgium 3 days." Herrera nodded slowly. "You did good," Novik said. "You saved lives, a lot of them." Herrera didn't look away from the snow falling over the broken steeple of the church. It melted when it touched the heat of the stone. Steam rose like ghosts. "I didn't do it to save lives," he said softly. "I did it because they wouldn't stop laughing." Novik understood. He sat beside him, neither man speaking. The wind howling low through the ruins of a town no map would bother to label again. 2 weeks later, a new Bazooka team took point during an assault on a fortified crossroads outside Cologne. They fired early, too early. The rocket hit short, bounced off a steel girder and exploded in midair. The loader was killed instantly. The gunner lost his sight. The ridge was never taken. Someone mentioned Herrera's name in the debrief. No one knew where he'd been sent. Only Greenfield knew. He'd seen the orders. Stateside medical leave. Discharged 3 weeks after that. They'd written down exhaustion. But Greenfield knew the truth. You can only carry the weight of a weapon like that so long before it stops being steel and starts becoming something else. Not just a tool. Not just a launcher. But memory, heat, smoke, and the ringing that never leaves your ears. Back in Germany, as the front rolled east toward the Rhine, another German gunner took his place behind an MG-42. His loader handed him a belt. He fed it into the receiver, cleaned it, checked the sights. And just before he chambered the first round, he paused. "Did you hear about that American?" he asked. "The one with the pipe?" His loader snorted. "That's just a story." "Maybe." He closed the top cover. "But if it's not, I hope he doesn't come here." In the ruined streets of Düren, the snow continued to fall. Quiet now, still, but somewhere in the stone and ash the barrel of a spent launcher remained. Pointed always forward. Toward the next laugh. And the silence that would follow. The Ruhr pocket smelled like rot. By March 1945, the Americans had crossed the Rhine and driven deep into the German heartland. What was left of the Wehrmacht clung to towns and valleys like blood on broken glass, unable to retreat, unwilling to surrender. Every village became a last stand. Every machine gun team swore to hold just one more street. But most had already learned what came next. They no longer mocked the American infantry as clumsy or green. They didn't laugh from behind their MG nests or shout obscenities after cutting down scouts. When they saw the smoke trails rise, when they saw the silhouette crouch behind cover, they knew. The pipe angel had returned. Except now, it wasn't just one man. Every rifle platoon had a bazooka team. Every squad leader knew how to call for them. What had once been a two-man anomaly in the woods of Huichin had become doctrine. In a hollowed-out village on the outskirts of Essen, Private First Class Louis Harmon knelt behind a pile of timber with his M1A1 balanced on his shoulder. He was 19, fresh from Mississippi, never fired at anything larger than a deer. But he'd heard the stories. An MG nest in the Ardennes, a pillbox outside Cologne, the fireball on the hill in Düren. The Germans had called him an angel with a pipe. He didn't feel like an angel. His boots were soaked. His ears rang. His best friend had lost his leg that morning to a mine wired to a child's doll. But he had the launcher. And he had the shot. The building across the street had gone silent for 20 minutes. Then came the sudden burst, an MG-34 with the barrel poking from a second-story window. 2 men went down before anyone returned fire. The rest froze. "Bazooka," the lieutenant said without looking. Harmon crawled forward on elbows and knees, the street shaking with distant shell fire. The loader followed, silent. No more yelling, no more excitement. They had done this twice yesterday. Just another window, just another nest. The launcher coughed. The rocket streaked. The window and the men inside vanished into dust. No cheers, no high fives, just more movement, more clearing, more silence where laughter once lived. In the days that followed, 2 more towns fell. 2 more machine gun lines erased by rockets fired from doorways, cellar holes, collapsed walls. The Germans began to leave signs on buildings. Nicht schießen, verwendet. Don't shoot wounded inside. Some were lies, some weren't. No one took chances. In a farmhouse northeast of Rimshade, Novik read a report out loud. Enemy abandoning fixed positions. Bazooka presence too high. Switching to mobile fire and move doctrine. He looked over at Greenfield, who was scrubbing mud from his hands with a rag. "Well," he said, "guess we broke their rhythm." Greenfield nodded. "Maybe they'll start calling us angels now." Novik snorted. "Not likely, we don't fly." Outside, the road curved down toward the valley. Armor columns rolled past. Jeeps, M10 tank destroyers, supply trucks loaded with crates of fresh rockets. Some GIs joked that they didn't need artillery anymore, just a dozen guys with tubes. Herrera stood alone under a tree that hadn't bloomed in years. His discharge had come, but he hadn't left. Not yet. He watched the trucks pass, watched new faces join the column, watched Harmon and his loader sit quietly in the back of a half-track, the launcher cradled in their laps like an heirloom. No one saluted him. No one thanked him. The war didn't have room for ceremonies. But they all knew. And he did too. What began as one shot into a laughing machine gun crew had grown into a doctrine of its own. One weapon, shoulder-fired, man-carried, had changed how men fought in alleys and ridges and ruined cathedrals. The Germans had learned it the hard way. And every time they dug in with a heavy gun and told themselves they could hold the line, they were reminded of that one lesson. Not from above, not from tanks, not from artillery. From the smoke, from the hiss, from the pipe, and the silence that followed.